Here's what here's what they did. They set up a marketing database and made repeated calls to over 12 million consumers across 32 states, all coming out of this company in Delray Beach, this MV Realty. They opened subsidiary companies all over the country and were doing the same work. What they would do, guys, is they would call people and they would say, guess what? I can give you $300 to up to $5,000. It's not a loan. You never have to pay me back. All you have to do is list the property with me if you ever sell it. Oh, and by the way, you never even have to sell. That's what they told these people. These people were marketed mostly over the telephone, but then they expanded their reach to all the socials and they had all of these, click here now for no loan, cash payout, just very, very aggressive. And sadly, they were preying as part of their marketing strategy, purposefully preying on the people that would be the most likely to fall for a scam like this, the poor, the elderly, and people that do not have English as their first language. So they would reach out to these folks. They would convince them that it was somehow in their best interest to let them give them this $500. And all they do is sign a piece of paper, promise if they ever were going to sell it, that they would list it. That doesn't seem too scary, right? And then, of course, these things were done either over the internet or the telephone. And then the shysters would get a mobile notary to drive out there and have these people sign the documents and say in exchange for a check. Oh, and by the way, they didn't even give people copies of the documents they signed, according to the Attorney General. Everything I'm telling you now, by the way, I have to say I'm a lawyer. This is from the Attorney General's complaints. It follows the same scheme that's described in the other states that are suing them, which are up to 6 now, I believe. So it seems kind of undisputed that this is what they did. The question is, was it illegal? So they would have these folks sign this agreement. So the agreement says, we decide we give you, for your value of your house, we give you a check for $3,000. All you have to do is sign this home benefit agreement. Like I told you, promising that they would list the house with them for 40 years. But if they didn't list the house with them, which they failed to tell them, for 40 years, and the house sold or even was transferred at a foreclosure sale or even on the death of the person who signed this agreement, they demanded their benefit agreement required that MV Realty could set the value for that property, not the actual value that it was sold on, and then charge that much, that 3%, if they sold it through anyone else. They recorded this document in the public records to create a title claim. So picture this. They call up elderly old guy or poor young mom, clicks on the money now because she's afraid she's losing everything. They call her up, they say, oh, we've got money. We'll give you $872 on the value of your house. And all you have to do is promise that if you ever list it, you will sell it with us. And we're going to have that agreement and you're going to be bound by it. They didn't tell people that they were filing these agreements in the public records, and then that operated as a lien, because you can imagine then what happens. Title company is running title. They find out that there is this memorandum of agreement that these folks are owed commission. They try to get a payoff and the whole thing goes into just a spinoff. Now, this was happening to people, as you can see here. If they were trying to refinance, if they were trying to get HELOC, if they were trying to get a reverse mortgage, they still would have to come up with the 3% of the value of the property as they determined it, not as the appraiser determined it, and so and so and so and so. So this, as you see here, it was a practice of around 32 states that we know of. As more attorneys general are piling onto the bandwagon. Florida was the first to sue, by the way, because Florida is obviously where the company is primarily located. So this 11 million people that were directly solicited by phone, plus an unknown number of million that reached out to them through their internet and social platforms, they recorded over 300,000 of these agreements across the United States. It's frightening. So let's talk about how did this happen. Anybody have any questions? You know, I like to take questions as we go. Does anybody, hi, whoever I see in the background, how does anybody have any questions about, what I've told you this far, how this scheme works? Can anyone get out of this? That's what we're going to talk about. Any other questions about how it worked? Okay, hearing none. Let's see who started this. This is Miss Amanda Zachman. Does anybody recognize Miss Amanda Zachman? She was known as the bully on season 15 as Big Brother. The producers of the show said before this company started, they said something somewhere around 2018 or 19. They were quoted as saying she was the most villainous and nastiest, most disloyal player, most hated player that they had ever had in that game. So that is Miss Zachman. And apparently she decided to take, according to the complaint, she decided to take those aggressive tactics, because some might say she was just aggressively playing the game. But she decided to take these aggressive tactics, and they really thought it would work. It's she and then two business partners are the primary defendants. So what sales pitch they had. This is what their internet site said before they started getting sued in 2021. Remember, 2022, actually, the first lawsuit was in November of this year. This is what people would see when they click on this. Look at that. Receive cash quickly. Between 3,000 and 5,000. Text your address and we'll get you a cash offer in less than 5 minutes. Think about that. They said you didn't have to pre-qualify. No obligation to sell your house. No need to borrow or make payments. Absolutely no credit check. That turns out that was not true. They were actually hard checking credit for a lot of these people. And of course, that was a problem if you care about your credit. So you can imagine what the average person would think when they saw this. And sadly, while you or I might have been smart enough not to get caught in the scheme, a lot of folks were. So what's happening now? First of all, MV has taken the position that they refuse to negotiate the amounts due. They have been sued, so far as I could tell, through the end of February. They have been sued in only 16 civil lawsuits in the state of Florida. And you can imagine why. Stop and think about it. If MV is refusing to negotiate, what happens is the title company goes to sell the house, or the lender goes to give the HELOC or the reverse mortgage, and they pull credit. And what do we see? This memorandum of agreement that says that we owe them 3% of the value of the house. Reach out and get a payoff is what that document says. And so, of course, title companies and lenders reach out to get a payoff. MV says, we don't negotiate. We owe that, they owe the $8,700 or else. And you can think about why that was a good strategy for them. You can't afford to hire a lawyer to sue them over the $5,000 or the $8,000 or even the $25,000 or $30,000 you might owe on a really big deal. That's the reality. Lawyers are expensive, and it's been hard for folks to find good, high quality attorneys. That's not fair to say. It's hard to find attorneys that can hit this the way it needs to be hit for such small amounts of money. Because if it cannot be enough for a individual person to come forward and say, I didn't understand this agreement, Judge. Well, that doesn't work. If you could get out of an agreement just by saying, I don't understand the agreement, then everybody would nullify every contract and every mortgage and every complicated legal document. So just going and saying, I didn't read this properly, or I didn't understand it, or they told me things that were not true, to actually successfully prosecute a case like that, you would have to do discovery, which means lawyers asking legal questions about every file that they had ever closed. And you'd have to have the time to dig through it and find the similar, you'd have to prove what the AG is trying to prove was that each of these agreements was part of an overall scheme of a deceptive trade practice. So the AGs are the ones that are having to come out in these cases mostly. So they don't settle. When sued, they almost always won, and they've won in 16 times in the state of Florida. There's only one that's still pending an order that they might win, but if they do that, they're going to lose them all. So the AGs in Ohio, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and us, of course, are suing. They're suing us for the unfair telephone solicitation. They did what those folks do, which is buy groups of area codes, numbers from area codes that look familiar, and they were calling people on the do not call list. The placing of this document, this memorandum agreement that causes problems with title, that's actually an illegal lien. If you realtors scratch back in your brain, you'll remember that you can't file a lien for your commission, right? It only is a very specific type of commercial lien owing for commission that's allowed. So it's an illegal lien, illegal solicitation in the home for the way they sent the people out there, and other violations of all kind of nasty stuff. Now, these cases are being, and this website, by the way, is still up and running. They have gone and they're still, their campaign is still going. Think about it. They're taking the position that they're doing nothing wrong. So they need to continue to act consistently with that position, right? So they cleaned up a few things. They're not recording the liens anymore, but they are still enforcing the contracts. They'll sue the family. They'll sue the seller independently, sue the family after probate. So those cases are still going forward. So they cleaned up a little stuff on their website, but they're still out there being predatory and scary, in my opinion. Of course, again, I have to say, I'm sure that MV Realty has a side of the story that is not revealed in the court documents that I've yet been able to review. But needless to say, it's going to be hotly contested. So what can a realtor do? So the question you asked, Karen, was an excellent question. Can anyone get out of this? And the answer is no. As I just said, they are not settling, and they are mostly losing across the country and definitely losing in the state of Florida. And that's why, for the reasons I've told you, bringing a suit to set aside one of the agreements requires more than just one person saying what they told me was different. Because of course, in the agreement, it says the only representations that matter are what's in this agreement. So they can make these individual claims, but none of that is necessarily convincing to a judge without being able to bring in other similar claims. So the AGs are our best option. What you can do is, number one, take advantage of commitments prior to closing. Most of these documents were drafted in 1920 and 21. So they're just now starting to come up to close. We've seen some already. We've seen, Karen has seen one. I don't know. Rebecca's not even heard of it. You will be, because you're going to start to see them, because this is just about the time now where people are trying to sell their properties. And this is going to be an issue. So always, whatever title company you work with, they should be providing you commitments prior to closing. We certainly do, no charge for that, whether it closes or not. So you'll see if one of those agreements is part of the title work. You need to counsel your customers, explain all the ups and downs. The AG suit, eventually, what they're trying to do is get every agreement set aside, all the money that MV Realty has collected, given back to the consumers, and then shutting them down. There's also legislation pending in the Florida legislature, as you can see there. And it should seem like a no-brainer to me. But this is the Florida legislature. So any questions? That's my beautiful title team and me with a good hair day. Any questions, anybody? No?
Yeah, I do. So is this one of those deals where if you run across this, obviously you're not really going to know this until you do a title search.
Right.
So is this one?
Yeah. So get your title. I've always preached, Karen, to get your title commitment at the time of the listing, because you should be working with a company that'll do that for you, so that there's this
right.
problem or any of these problems. A lot of title companies are not pulling title until 2 weeks prior to closing, and that's not enough time to fix the problem. So that's the only place, really, Karen, you can see it. What the stories, according to stories that you see on the internet, Karen, most people don't remember these agreements. They don't remember how long that it might have kept them bound up for. They don't remember them correctly. So certainly you should ask, absolutely ask. But
clients can't even remember signing a buyer broker agreement 6 weeks ago with another agent.
Yeah, I'm telling you, relying on their memory is not, I certainly ask, but I wouldn't do that instead of getting the commitment. I would do both. Anybody else have any questions?
I know you said that they didn't give them a copy. Is there a way to get a copy? If they do remember that they signed something like this, is there a way to get a copy of that agreement?
Yeah, so you can try to reach out there's a couple ways. So first of all, a memorandum of the agreement is going to be published in the title records, but it's just a short form that just lays out some of the basic terms. All of the terms of the agreement are in the agreement itself. MV Realty keeps copies of those. They have been completely unresponsive. We even had a file where we weren't even trying to argue that it was unfair or anything like that. It was not signed by the wife and it was a homestead. And they didn't even respond. Their lawyers did not even respond. So how much, and I can imagine why. Those lawyers are busy. So you can certainly ask. MV Realty can be found on, is it a going concern? Can you imagine? I feel sorry for those who work there, the negative press that they're getting, but it's still a going concern. And according to them, they're doing gangbuster business. So you call them, maybe they would help you directly. But I know that when we tried to deal with the folks we needed to deal with on the payoff, it was like, nope. And that's what we're hearing all over the country. They've just taken the position. There are stories that are not in any of the official complaints. And again, this is just internet gossip and I don't, haven't heard their side of the story, but it seems to be a well-known or a wide-reaching guess that what they were going to do is take all these agreements and securitize them. In other words, sell them to another company for big money based on the future value of all these agreements. And I think that's another reason why they don't settle them, right? They need to show that they're getting what they're entitled to get on the paper in order to make it as attractive to investors as possible. Does that make sense? And again, I just want to say, this third time I said it, I have not invited MV Realty to come here and speak. I didn't do that. But I can say on their behalf that I'm sure that they have a side of the story, and I know that they are vigorously defending these claims. I think ultimately, at a minimum, we'll get a ruling that these memorandum agreements are not binding on real property. I think a minimum we'll get that, so at least the seller can sell their property without getting a quote unquote payoff. I think we'll get that ruling. I would be surprised if they got all of what they're looking for. It'll probably settle and that'll be the end of that. But at least it's been a change in their business practices somewhat since these cases started. But remember, we have cases, we have all these agreements signed between 2019 and 2022. So they're all kind of starting to ripening now. The saddest part is when people lose their house in foreclosure, and maybe they were expecting 25,000 in equity, MV will come in and take 3%. They, according to internet stories, they offer to perform the work. You have to first offer it to them. And then if you don't offer it to them or you ultimately close with someone else, you owe 3% as they determine. However, every single person that at least is reported has said that they said, okay, list my house, and they got no help. There were no realtors there. You can imagine, somebody located in Delray Beach is not going to be able to sell property in, Leon County or whatever. So that's what consumers are saying, that although they said they would perform services, even when they tried to ask them to do so, they did not do it. Because I'm sure that was not the business model. Rebecca, do you have a question? Hold on, you're muted.
I just was wondering that wouldn't that, if they ask for the help and they don't give the help, wouldn't that be a breach of contract somehow?
Yeah, sure. But again, you got to sell them for that. You got to sue them for that. And what homeowner can afford a lawsuit? Y'all know lawyers are so darn expensive. And then the time that it would take for that lawsuit to proceed, we're talking years. What seller's going to hold up, selling their property? Some might if it's a big number, but what they're seeing is people are just paying it to go away, paying it to get it done because they can't really afford to do anything else. It's very heartbreaking to me. And especially, I know that the file that we had just recent was exactly their kind of target audience, an elderly person who didn't really understand what was happening. Are they finding in these cases that they have the correct homeowners on these agreements? If not, wouldn't that nullify it? Right. So that's an excellent point. Unfortunately, Shayna, if an agreement is recorded against a piece of property, if it's obvious that it was a wrong name, like the person named was never owned that property or never had any interest in that property, you maybe could get a title company to write over it. Because remember, use this as a reminder of this thing I tell y'all all the time. Title insurance companies are in the business of selling title insurance for a profit. So while I could legally argue in a court and I would win that HVA agreement should not be considered a lien that should be collected, I would argue that and win. But what title company is going to buy a lawsuit or a potential lawsuit for a $2,000 premium? They're not going to do it, right? Because then they'd have to spend 2 years and $60,000 in attorney's fees to prove that the thing was wrongly recorded in the first place. And these were sophisticated people who knew what they were doing. And I think they knew that, practically speaking, they could hold the line. It was working well, according to the internet. It was working well when they were just pigs, when they were using this Opta list, and they limited it to 1 year, and they did a little, and I think they made some good money on that maybe, and decided to expand it to what they were using. So it's pretty scary. So I guess the takeaway for y'all is there's only so much you can do. Again, they're not, until the Attorney General issues its opinion, until the court issues its opinion on the Attorney General's case, they're still floating out there, and we have to deal with them. And as we said, they're not settling. Now, some of the cases, because they are small claims court cases, I'm hoping that maybe judges might be a little more, do a little better than they've done going forward, because there is so much dirt out there that's kind of matters of record. But that's just a hope that you find a judge that will be kind. But again, how much you'd have to pay the lawyer to go and make the arguments is, sometimes many times more than the amount of money that they're asking for. Any other questions? All right, hearing none, I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you so much. If you'd like a copy of our PowerPoint, reach out to us per usual, and we'd be glad to provide it. Thank you, guys. See you next week, and we're going to be talking about how to legally co-market with some of your third-party vendors like title companies and mortgage insurers and home repair guys. We want to make sure that you get the biggest bang for your buck without going to jail. And so some things happening around town or around the community that could put some people in jail. So I don't want anybody getting in trouble, but I want you to maximize your marketing efforts. So see us next week. I look forward to it, and thank you so much.